It's Monday, and database and SQL. First thing we did, practice. They were to review the previous work and do the new work. Then we did a design, terms, and example. We talked about section 1, but we really didn't do much of a review. This is the 4th week. This is the 6th day in terms of sessions. With Cis-332. Couple things to review. This time of the year, 4 weeks in, you can check the syllabus of all your classes, make sure you're on track. Inside the preparation materials in the course, in this course, it talks about discussions, and when you respond to a discussion, make sure you have value and content in that response. An example would be if somebody was to read the response all by itself without seeing what they were responding to, does it make some sense? You know, avoid things, I really agree, or that's really a good point, and all those things. Those are really kind of meaningless. When we're doing online research, make sure that you reference any material that you cut and paste in. Alright. So online research. And online research is great, you know, you're working on a topic, you watched a video or something, and then you go out and find some more information about it. That's really good. But make sure you understand where it's acceptable and where you're supposed to give your own ideas. Slowly, we are gathering terms in the course, a lot of them. And the terms then will lead us into design. And we talked about here the idea of understanding the terms. You can you can memorize terms, which usually doesn't do us much good because it leaves us. The key is to try to understand how the term relates to what we're working on. Better help us design databases down the road. And then eventually you want to be able to apply it. Alright. Student help. Skills access. So this is an idea, okay? We talk about a example problem. So using a browser via the World Wide Web, we'd like to be able to enter some information and retrieve some information to allow us to either register ourselves for student help. And what that would be is you would enter into the database name and some information and what skills that you would be good at being a student help person, like in the Student Learning Center. Then somebody would be able to query that information that's stored somewhere and find somebody that could possibly help with a particular thing that they're trying to do. So the first step here was to analyze the problem. Problem, challenge, issue, however we want to call that. And so I talked a little bit more, about the user model, how they would have, their view would be from a browser to do this. So when we're doing things like this, we analyze, we get feedback. I talked a little bit about the idea. You have a client that you're working with. Okay? So here's the developer. That's a generic term for everything we're doing up here. And so you have a client you work with, so you're constantly getting feedback from the client. You give them some ideas of how you might solve the problem, they'll give you some feedback. The key is not designing something that doesn't match the needs of the client. Big deal. It's like building a house and not asking somebody how many bedrooms they want or where they want the bathrooms or the kitchen. Okay, so our next step then, building a conceptual view. Once you understand what they want and what you have to put in, you can start building a logical model. This step is important before you start going into the nitpicky items of the physical model. So we're going to take this example and move forward with that. Before we move forward, an important item here. In a database management system, we have lots of attributes, data items that are filled, data items. We have attributes in which we fill them with information. We have these data elements, and we have a lot of them. And sometimes it could be confusing, okay, what the term means. So we can build a data dictionary by building a table and list the data and then defining what each of those attributes means. For example, in a school environment, if somebody mentions the word class, does that mean algebra or does that mean sophomores? So there's a classic example of how you'd have to put that in your data dictionary and define it. Next thing the students did was create the entities. So entities would be the theory term. SQL uses the term tables. In here you'll hear me most of the time talk about entities, and students realize when you create an SQL, they call it a table. A lot of examples I draw them this way, so they look like tables. Okay? That's actually my preferred way, but another way to do it is to write the name of the entity and then list the attributes underneath it. So the students came up with some entities, and we settled on these three to start with. This one was easy. They used the term student. People or whatever. Remember, entities, person, place, or thing. So they came up with students. Okay? And then in the student, we came up with, not all of them, but some of the attributes. Student ID, the name of the student, date of birth, gender, how to contact the student. And we were very careful. Somebody said, well, we'll list which skills they have here. Well, that really that wouldn't fit directly on the student, because first of all, what happens if they have more than one skill? How would you store that? Would you write multiple skills under skills? And what happens when you add a skill, or you want to take a skill out? How would you manage that? Alright, so we created people, created skills. skill work ID. So we did it like school, so what subjects and how much experience they have in there. And then they talked about experience maybe being filtered into maybe 4 categories. You know, expert, very good, some experience, still learning. Something like that. So we can take this and limit the domain in which somebody can pick from. So it would be like a drop-down menu, and they'll mark which one of those in reference to the subject they picked. The subjects could be narrowed down too. You could do the same thing. So this is building constraints onto the attribute. It can only be these particular things. And you can see doing that for a lot of things, like date of birth. You could constrain that between some particular dates. Nobody could be below this date, and nobody could have been born in the future. You can do that, okay? Alright. And then we talked about name, being some type of composite. First name, middle initial, last name. If you're going to store that all in one attribute, you can do that, okay? You decide, but you can do that. Then we talked about training. Training ID. Okay, if we look here, primary key in our base tables. That, you can bring that primary key, and here would be a foreign key. Foreign key. Because it's a primary key from another table in this table. So the training, where you can get training, we could list. You could list, see if I can clarify this, you could list somebody's name and what skill they have. Now, this brings to light, did this work here? Or does this have to be in this table? I think so. So I think what we'll do is we'll have to look at that first thing on, we'll have to look at that on Wednesday. That could be an issue because it doesn't make any sense here, does it? After we look at this, probably makes more sense to have the experience up here, so they can list the skill than their experience with it. Alright, well, one more slide. Oh, FYI, we did a little work on MySQL, but the only work we did was the practice, which you can check. You can open up the new practice and always see the results from the previous one. We've got quiz on Wednesday coming up, and then an exam next week. Exam over the sections 1 and 2. Quiz primarily section 1. And we start a new section next week, talking about relationships. One-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. We'll talk about that next week. That's it.